I would like to introduce Gary, our very special guest, who is an award-winning author and journalist, a professor of sociology at Manchester University, and has written many brilliant articles and books that many of you will know of. We have a bookstall just behind this tent, or in front of this tent, the way that I'm looking at it, that has a number of his books. We've got a couple of them at the front here. I'll just plug my absolute favourite, which is his book on identity politics, which I would really recommend. It's a fantastic read and very thought-provoking. We're going to chat to this evening really up until we have to send you all away to the main rally. So we've got a little bit of time. I've got some questions for Gary, but you will also get a brief chance to ask your own questions towards the end. We're hoping to fit in a little bit of audience participation, questions, comments from yourselves as well. So, first of all, thank you very much, Gary, for joining us here.
Pleasure.
Yep, let's have a big round of applause. And I think it's a very heartfelt round of applause because probably, like myself, all of you who are here this evening always feel that when we see an article pop up by Gary, it's going to be something worth reading and it's going to break through some of the nonsense that we see in the mainstream media, and we're going to get something that really gets to the heart of an issue. And I was thinking, Gary, now that we've got you here, really, let's start by taking your general thoughts on... Really, we were just chatting before the meeting about some of the things that we've been through with the pandemic, the rise of Black Lives Matter. It's been a pretty tumultuous couple of years, and I'd just like to get a little bit of your kind of thoughts on some of that.
Well, yeah, I mean, we had this, devastating election loss in 2019, and then quickly followed by the beginning of the pandemic, which really highlighted an awful lot of things that had been said in the previous 4 years, that the space that had opened up through kind of what had happened in Labour Party and Corbyn and so on. That COVID exposed the structural inequalities, the fact that, racism and poverty were issues of life and death for many people. And then in the middle of that, because what the pandemic showed was the banal ways in which racism and poverty can kill us, through housing, through the work that you do, through the space that you have, and so on. And then came Black Lives Matter, which showed the completely brazen ways in which racism and poverty can kill us, particularly racism. And that those two things came together in this kind of tumultuous way, kind of while we were still at home. Do you know what I mean? Obviously people did come out onto the streets for that, but while we were still at home. And then there were the economic effects of the crisis, some of which has been kind of accelerated by Russia's invasion of Ukraine and so on. You can't hear. Can you hear now? Sorry. Which has put us into this situation now where we kind of fight or die, where those are our options: the cost of living crisis, the fuel crisis, you eat or you are cold. I think the BBC survey said more than half of British people are skipping meals. So we've gone full circle. If we go back to the kind of the defeat, the electoral defeat, I don't think it certainly wasn't an ideological defeat, but it was an electoral defeat, to some extent a political defeat, to this moment where, on the one hand, you have the Tories imploding, and for this you would need 3 hands, so I'm going to give that up. But you have the Tories imploding, you have Labour, you have people actually out on the streets, on picket lines, in a range of ways defending the most basic things. And you have a Labour leadership that is running away from those people who are in struggle, which is kind of depressing, if a bit predictable.
Yeah, can people hear us now? Over there they can. Somebody over there can't hear us. If you're over that side, you might want to just move around. I think the acoustics are aimed that way. So thank you for that, Gary. I totally agree with you about your take on that. And I think the government likes to pretend that we're not in COVID anymore, that COVID, if you can pretend that COVID goes away, it goes away and it doesn't exist. But obviously you're right, it did tell us a lot of things about the state of society and about the inequalities that exist, particularly I would say around race and class, the disproportionate impact that it had on black people, and the way that that was, as you say, a window then into all those other questions about housing, even things like access to outdoor space, whether or not you have a balcony is determined largely by your race and your class, and other things like that. But I think it's interesting where you end there with one of your three hands being the people are coming out onto the picket lines, because I think what's changed as well is that we've gone from COVID, which exposed the lines of division and inequality, to starting to see people fighting back against them on the basis of class as well, which is quite an exciting development, isn't it? I think the strike by the RMT changes the political possibilities for us now. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think it has a potential to. Yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting watching Mick Lynch on the television and seeing the effort that is put in to trying to either distort what he's saying or distort what they're seeing or distort, and him just playing it with a very straight bat, like, what on earth are you talking about? I mean, it's a kind of masterclass, really. And it really does expose the for those who need it, I guess, given Corbyn, the kind of failures of the mainstream media in their kind of desperate attempts to create some other narrative, to kind of sort of tell people that the things they're experiencing aren't the things they're experiencing, or that somehow, you know, they'll go from like inflation is 9%, cost of living is the worst, consumer confidence is the worst, to like, why are these people on strike? And it's like, well, what, you know, what the hell do you think? What are they supposed to do? So, yeah, it's you know, there is everything to play for in this moment. And there's only, there aren't as many people as one would like to see who have the power who are actually playing. But actually, I think most people are up for it.
Yeah. I think that's definitely true. And let's hope that this is the beginning of something much wider, because for a lot of us, we really feel the time has got to come where we get, you know, some fight back against all the things that have been done to working class people, and all of the oppression and the exploitation that we faced over very, very many years. Just to come back to some of the other things that you raised, that we were talking about Black Lives Matter, I know that you've made observations previously about the nature of a movement that can rise so quickly, so dynamically, often led by people who are not used to leading movements necessarily on social media, but how that can also become quite an ephemeral, disappear, lose kind of any sense of structure. I wonder what you could say more about your thoughts on that.
Well, I think that, is that better? I think that we have, and I say this by way of observation and critique, not criticism at all, but that we're in this moment where we have the ability, thanks to social media, to cohere and convene large numbers of people within a few days for a march, for a demonstration, for whatever. And we have the ability to reach unprecedented numbers of people with our message, and to discover that people are receptive to that message. So opinions about racism have changed as a result of Black Lives Matter. It cleared political space. But, or and, depending on how you look at it, there was no... I just want to get this right, because I don't want to end up like anywhere near Keir Starmer. There were no structures. There were no permanent structures. If you were looking to reconvene, if you were looking to recohere, if you were looking to gather all of those people, or at least some of them, and say, let's go again, how would you? How would you get them together for the Rwanda flight? How would you? And so we've cleared political space. And I don't think this is particular to the Black Lives Matter movement, actually. I think we could say this about Occupy Wall Street, about Me Too in a different way. We've cleared political space, but we have not proved particularly adept at building on it. And our enemies are building, even though it's not their space. And so we find that we are advancing, I think, ideologically. We are changing people's minds. And yet, politically, in terms of law, nationally, certainly, we're kind of going backwards. And that contradiction can't hold forever. But you kind of see it in America in a very real way, where the Republicans have only won the popular vote once since 1992. Once. No, since 1988, actually. They've won it once. And yet, it is their Supreme Court judges who are rolling back the legislation on abortion rights, rolling back the legislation on gun control, who are setting the agenda. The biggest demonstrations in American history, most of them have taken place in the last 5 or 6 years, and yet, in a range of ways, we're going backwards.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's a very interesting, contradictory situation because obviously when Black Lives Matter burst onto the scene, for me, it was the best thing that happened throughout the whole pandemic. It filled us with hope, with joy, with confidence that people would come out and speak out. It collectivised that grief that we felt and that anger at what was being done to people. And you're right, it has changed the terrain of racism. I think there are things that wouldn't have been possible without Black Lives Matter. In a British context, you think the scandal at Yorkshire Cricket would never have been exposed without the power of Black Lives Matter. The confidence of people to take on the question of child Q being strip searched in Hackney would never have happened without Black Lives Matter giving people that sense that we can do something, we can be listened to, our voices matter, Black lives genuinely matter. So I think it's changed that terrain and we've moved forwards, but at the same time, you're right, there's a massive ruling class backlash. You see it over the horrific Rwandan deportations. You see it globally, don't you, in terms of that. And I don't know whether there's anything else that you want to say about that, or whether... I think the other thing we really want to talk about coming out of some of this discussion is the question of identity politics and how far both the left and the right use the question of identity and why that's become such an important player in our political world.
Yeah, I mean, in my book here, I talk about identity as being like fire. You can warm yourself with it and you can burn yourself with it. And that everybody comes to politics with something. So when people say, oh, it's just identity politics, I think, would you say that about Malcolm X or Martin Luther King or kind of the suffragettes or kind of gay liberation? And what we saw in the pandemic is that kind of to mobilize on the basis of being black isn't just about how you feel. It's about how your life is. If you're more likely to be stopped, searched, unemployed, badly educated, or whatever, then your race is a material thing. It's not just how you feel. If you're more likely to be underpaid, to feel unsafe, to be targeted by the police as women are, then your gender or your sex is not just how you feel. It's a material thing, and there's a connection between how you feel and those material things. So it doesn't do, I think, for the left just to say, oh well, that's identity politics, and yet, and here I'm just staying on the left for now, there is a problem when people. Well, what I say in the book is that identity is an important place to start and a terrible place to finish. That you start with everybody starts with where they are, right? It would be ridiculous to think that if I was born as an Indian female in the 17th century, I'd have the same politics as I do now. I'm a product of my context. But then I have to take who I am, a bit like filling up your car, and then you have to go on the road with everybody else. So then I have to kind of, it's for me and the rest of the world. If the things I'm fighting for only benefit me, then they're not much use. So the issue is the degree to which people can leverage what is in the politics of identity in order to make common cause and solidarity with other people, which people have proved exceptionally capable of doing time and time again. The March on Washington, 1963, where King made the I Have a Dream speech, was a march for jobs and freedom organised by the civil rights movement and the trade union movement. This is not something that has just been invented. People have constantly been seeking solidarity and alliances all the way through the left's history, and if they didn't, there wouldn't be a left. So there's that on the left, and I do sense a propensity towards an indulgence, a kind of the politics of hurt feelings, the kind of for me and for nobody else, you know, that kind of that notion of it just being about how you feel, and that's a problem. The right, whereas the left is squeamish about identity politics, the right has no problem with it. Donald Trump was an identity politics candidate. He stood for white people, for evangelicals, for men and the women who could come under any of those kind of rubrics. When he walks through the Black Lives Matter, gets the paramilitaries to get rid of the Black Lives Matter demonstration and walks to the church, this man with how many kids by how many women and kind of lawsuits from porn stars, and he holds up a Bible in front of the church. That's identity politics. And the right have been leveraging white people, religion, religious fundamentalism, in a way that, it's not that I would like to see the left mimic that, but they have absolutely no problem. When they talk about cancel culture, so often the people who say that they've been cancelled are saying it from newspaper columns on television. I'm like, you're not bloody cancelled. The Palestinians have been cancelled, if you're looking for a group of people that have been cancelled. Gypsy Romans and Travellers, they've been cancelled. If you're looking for people who we're no longer talking about, who can't get a fair say, who can't actually, can't get an input. If you look at the way that Mick Lynch is being treated, they're trying to cancel him permanently. These people, they talk about freedom of speech. Where were they when the debate about the IHRA was going on? Where were they? They were nowhere. And so we have to understand these people as hucksters and as charlatans, as the charlatans that they are. So I'm really worried about the identity politics of the right, because they're quite good at it. They're quite adept at it. They really are shameless in their employment of it. And I wish the left could be a bit more comfortable in the notion that people come to politics with something. And that thing, it doesn't have to be indulged, but it does have to be understood.
I think that's really interesting. And just to add to the people who are being cancelled, I think the other people that you're seeing cancelled at the moment is people with disabilities who are essentially being told by the government that they don't exist anymore. They're not a factor in public policy making, in COVID, in any of this stuff. They're just expected to just lock themselves in their homes and come out in 20 years' time. So I think it's a really good point that you make, exposing the hypocrisy of that. And I really love this phrase. When I read your book, the phrase, identity is a crucial place to start, it is a terrible place to finish, is one of the phrases that I've kept in my mind when I've been through various struggles, because I think it's true. I think often what motivates us is the injustices that we see, that we feel, that we experience. But just organising on the basis of identity, and I think we saw this with Black Lives Matter, isn't enough, because it doesn't necessarily give you a strategy. So you can see that. I think that's one of the reasons that Black Lives Matter becomes dissipated in a way, is that there is no way to resolve the fact that you can organise on the basis of Black Lives Matter, but your conclusion from that can be support black businesses, it can be get more black people elected, get more black police chiefs, it can be, we saw this at the Child Q conference the other week around the question of the police. There was a whole range of how do we respond to what happened to Child Q, coming from black people themselves, saying either we should work better with the police, or we should have community policing, or we should abolish the police. So I think that's one of the problems with identity. Like you say, it can be a good place to start, but it doesn't necessarily deal with questions of strategy of what we're trying to achieve.
Well, yeah, and it also, there's very little, particularly if you only have the power of your community, which is a considerable power, but it's not like money where you can just do it on your own and you can pay people to do it. That you also need coalition. One of the things I thought was intriguing after Black Lives Matter exploded was the Sarah Everard and the police, and this notion that for a lot of people, and I think this will be crude, but for a lot of white women, there was this sense that, the police aren't here to protect us. And this was something of a revelation. And I thought, I just wish that there could be some transfer of experience, some coalition, some committee, because you are not on your own in that. And there have been others who have been saying that, and my guess would be that there would be some black men who were looking at this and thinking, that's a shame, it's really got nothing to do with me. And all during the Stephen Lawrence, Black Lives Matter, through all of the protests around Stop and Search, there would have been many white women who thought, this has nothing to do with me, or even worse, the police are there to protect me against these people. And what we saw, the problems have mushroomed since there, it's also homophobia and other things, is that the police aren't protecting anybody, really. And actually, they're a menace, which is not inevitable, but I became politically active and aware during the miners' strike at the age of 15. And it was news in some pit villages that the police could be like that. And I did think, first of all, it wasn't news to black people in London, but actually also in Northern Ireland and in a range of places in Britain. The information was there that this is what the state does, and this is how you need to respond, and these are the things that we found worked. And what I don't want, and this comes back to the point about the kind of the lack of structure, and we burn brightly and then we fade and then we burn brightly again, and each time there is a reinvention. We reinvent ourselves a little bit, but we also reinvent the wheel every time, and that kind of it would be institutional knowledge if there was an institution, but the kind of knowledge of the struggle is sometimes lost and has to be regathered and then put back to center stage. But the facts are there, and the potential for coalition, for very mighty coalitions, do exist. But the arguments have to be made, and in the absence of that, you have each group fighting in their silo, and sometimes fighting each other for the biggest silo.
Yes, thank you. And I suppose just moving on a little bit to talk a little bit more about identity. I'm particularly interested, because of your breadth of experience since the miners' strike, following the debates on the left and around racism, about how you think black identity itself has changed, because what it means to be black itself is a contested identity, and in Britain we have a historical tradition of there being a definition of black that is not biological, that is seen as political, that was forged in struggle, of united struggle between black, Asian, other people of colour, that is still held on to by some of the trade unions, but is not necessarily seen by most people as what black means in Britain anymore. And I'm really interested in your thoughts about this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a product of my time, and so I do understand black as a political colour. It's not the colour of my skin, certainly. And I'm also very conscious, age-wise, that there is a thing that people do when you get to my age, where you hang on to things when you really need to kind of actually engage with where people are, as opposed to where you were or where you'd like them to be. And the truth is that I honestly don't care what you call it, so long as you're doing it. And so, you know, BAME was a term that was invented while I was abroad. Nobody asked me. And it's not one that I kind of would use. But, you know, I've spoken to kind of staff associations and they said, well, what do you think? And I said, look, if it got the right people in the room, I wouldn't care. Call it black, call it blame, call it people of colour, call it... I really don't give a shit what you call it. Just get in the bloody room. And so... and I do understand why it's fallen apart, or not fallen apart exactly, but gone out of fashion, that there were a set of experiences that were much more similar in the 70s than they are now. We think of the attacks on Muslims and Islamophobia and how that did make a difference in a specific way. If you look at the difference between the fate of Bangladeshis and Indians, or of Africans and people from the Caribbean, that there are differences. But what I say to people when they say, oh, you know, we just want to do this on the basis of being ethnically black, whatever that is, from the sub-Saharan, and I say, look, you know, my parents are from the Caribbean. If you've ever seen a Jamaican and a Barbadian and a Trinidadian go at it, just about roti, let alone about kind of, you know, who's a roughneck and who's a limer and who's snooty and so on, that the unity that you evoke is entirely invented, right? That Stuart Hall said, I had to come to Britain to be Caribbean. I was Jamaican. And so the unity that you invent of blackness is one that actually kind of only works because you want it to work. And that means that you can invent any kind of unity that you like. So while the political blackness is one that I kind of I prefer, I try not to fetishize it. What I want is for people to organize, and if they're organizing on the basis of resistance and anti-racism, then honestly, call it what you like.
I'm just mindful of the time. We want to get a few questions in. But before we do that, obviously we've got the benefit as well of you having been in America and in Britain. And I wondered whether you wanted to say anything about the different contexts of race and class. I mean, it's a big topic in America compared to Britain, but any particular things that struck you about the way that that played out or plays out?
Yeah, I think crudely and quickly, I'd say we are a smaller group here from, and more recently, by and large, migrant. And that does two things. First of all, it demands coalitions of us in a way that is less true in America, where in the big cities, like in Chicago, African Americans are a third of the city. They can do things on their own. In New York, they're a quarter of the city. So they can do things even without Latinos or even without Asian Americans and so on. So it demands more coalitions of us, and it also gives us a more internationalist. We start from a more internationalist place. Our parents or our grandparents often were from somewhere else, and so some sense of a global identity, as opposed to African Americans who through slavery have been there for centuries, and who in very real ways are American, and even the very place that they came from is not clear. So there's that. Then the one other thing that I would say is that, broadly speaking, Britain is more class conscious than America, and that feeds into black politics much more. So there is a more of a class-based element in our politics. Now, a lot of that is, all of that's up for grabs, and a lot of that is changing. And the longer that black people are here in Britain, the more British they will become, the less global they will become. There is a class politics growing in America that has certainly had an impact on black politics there. So it's all in flux, but those were the main differences.
And I think, just to go back to the Black Lives Matter movement for a moment, obviously, like all major social movements, it comes up against a series of challenges. I think every movement does. How to sustain it is one of the things that we've talked about, which is not just unique to the kind of social media era. I think this has always been a question. When a movement grows, it can reach a certain point, and at that certain point, people can be unified to a certain point, but then debate challenges, the ruling class fights back, cracks begin to emerge, and the movement has to find its way forwards. And I think we've seen that definitely with Black Lives Matter, which faced a whole series of debates, challenges, arguments. I think maybe the difference there was that it didn't have the structures to iron out or debate some of those, because if an argument is carried out just through social media, how is that ever arbitrated? How does that ever come to a conclusion? But I guess the other thing flowing from that I'd really like to discuss with you is kind of what would success look like? Because obviously there are some concrete goals for Black Lives Matter. It managed to get the murderer of George Floyd locked up, which is no mean feat given how much the police get away with racist violence in every country. So it achieved some things, but what would success look like in your view, were Black Lives Matter to really succeed?
I mean, it's a very good question, for the simple reason that when you're talking about the civil rights movement, for example, you could say success is when we can vote. Success is when the signs come down, and so on. Whereas I think what it looks like will be more opaque. And here's what I've sensed, and where I see success, is that I feel that Black Lives Matter emboldened a large number of people, and that its effect was like a pollination. It just kind of landed in places. And so I've seen and heard, and this is anecdotal, unfortunately, but it's difficult to track this, people in their workplaces kind of saying, actually, you know what, I'm not feeling this anymore. We're going to want these posts to be advertised. We're going to want this to be done. We are going to... And they've had some victories, and even when they haven't had victories, because you can't always guarantee victory, but when you struggle, you change. And so, I guess I'm not so. That'll do for me to see people emboldened, and not just black people, anti-racist, emboldened, to see them feel that challenge things that they've wanted to challenge for a while, but felt like now's the time to see. And some of these things are symbolic, but symbols shouldn't be mistaken for substance, but they're not insubstantial. To see the British football team take the knee and that go into people's houses. To see Marcus Rashford just stand up and say, "I'm Marcus Rashford. I'm a black man from Manchester, and I'm not going to apologise for that." To see Stormzy say the things that he does, to see a kind of generation of young black people who are done with it and who, don't recognise the series of defeats that certainly I grew up with, and are just like, well, no, we're not doing that anymore. That'll do for me for now. It's not the end, but it's a journey, and I'm delighted to be on that journey with them, following them actually.
I'm with you on that 100%. And I think if you think back to the times that we grew up and the racism shouted in our faces, or you think about the crap that passed for television at the time, that you wouldn't see a normal black face on TV, you would only see racism in the portrayal of black characters, and people are not taking any of that stuff anymore. And certainly in my workplace, it's probably the same wherever people are. People are more willing to step up against racism, and you're right, that is a big step forwards for people.
I volunteer teach at my daughter's school. She's somewhere watching Netflix right now, so that's. And I teach the kids on Tuesday afternoon. That one group is 7, 8, 9, the other 9, 10, 11, and I did this thing with them where I talked about 3 people who I'd interviewed: Franklin McCain, who was a sit-in protester; John Carlos, who raised his fist at the '68 Olympics; and Claudette Colvin. And we were chatting about them, and they had to write a story about how they would feel if they did it. Anyway, the point is that when I asked them what do you think this fist raised? What does that mean? And they said, that means Black Lives Matter. And that was a transgenerational passing of the baton. That had there not been Black Lives Matter in the way that they've had, I'd have said, what do you think that means? And they said, well, I don't know, because they're 8 or 9. I haven't heard of Black Power, the Black Power movement, and all that kind of stuff. But there was, and that's something. That's something very, very real and kind of tangible, that kind of this group of kids in Hackney understand a symbol of black resistance that I think I could have asked that question 4 or 5 years ago, no one would have known.
That is fantastic, and I think this is a good moment if we throw the meeting open to a few questions. I'll ask people to keep their questions, comments quite brief so that we can get a few of you in, and then probably, Gary, I'll take a few and then get you to come back on them, if that's okay. So we've got a roving mic somewhere, haven't we? Who's got the roving mic? Oh, there you go. So just behind you.
Hi. I feel a bit intimidating speaking to you, Gary, but I almost feel like there's a trick we miss when we talk about race and class, and I think that's kind of neo-colonialism and the processes by which we maintain race by actually exploiting the global south, where the majority of people are black and brown. And I almost feel like because the BLM movement is quite Eurocentric and really considers race through a Eurocentric angle, as you mentioned, race isn't a biological entity, it's a process. You become racialized, but that process of becoming racialized is because of the fact that so many black and brown lives are expendable, particularly in the global south. And I often feel like that's not really addressed at all in the discussion of class and race. So I was wondering what you thought about that.
Thank you very much, Brother Professor Gary. And I articulate one thing that I emphasize. Diversity is not a crime at all, and politics of identity has nothing to do with anything, but it is ideas. Ideas far much more. Because anything else, poverty of ideas is the worst poverty anybody can have. Hence, racism. Hence, anything, because they don't consider individual as individual and consider him at his own personal intellectual content or whatever force he has. But by sir, we mean that we are people like the rest of the world, either Chinese or Indian, no any spread of which we know that universal declaration of human rights, universality of human rights is imperative by all nations in the world. Please understand that we, black people, especially on the continent, black African, we are the first people on earth according to the science, and therefore everything known in this world is African origin. I beg your pardon I'm not trying to say I'm superior, I'm not saying it's anything, but perhaps some of the people understand us as physically, but less intelligent superiority. Please understand our cry for understanding that we're also people, and we tend to cooperate, not to isolate ourselves like China when it had closed economy. In our culture and our Ubuntuism, you are because I am. Without you, I can't exist. You defend him to the point where, and welcome anybody come to us, and they take us as we are stupid. We are not stupid. We are bad. We are Bantu. Special creation by God, by which we mean, no, whether you are coming from, whether Wazungu came from, anywhere, we welcome you. And you come and stay. Please understand that we are welcoming people. We are not childish, neither childlike, but we are very, very, very serious, resilient people who, ever since 1446,
Can I just ask you to conclude your comments?
When they said to go Africa, ever since then, we have survived and we shall survive till death do us apart. We shall resist. Thank you very much.
I've got just behind him.
Thank you, and it's great to hear you, Gary, talking today with Esme. You talked about how COVID exposed some of the divisions in society in terms of race and class. And I think that the latest attack with the rolling back of Roe versus Wade is something else that it seems that it is going to reveal even more, isn't it? Those inequalities with African American and poor working class and rural women being disproportionately affected by the attack on abortion rights, and even the fact that maternal mortality in America for African Americans is 3 times the rates for whites. And I just wondered what the prospect you felt that there was of resisting this. There was a massive movement of people protesting when Trump was initially elected, huge demonstrations, the women's marches, but they weren't just women, obviously. And I just wondered, there doesn't seem to be that yet, that unified struggle, and I wondered, if you could comment on that and the prospects for that, because this time last week some of us were outside the US Embassy fighting on this, and I think it's something that's concerning many of us, of how can there be some sort of resistance to it.
Very, very quickly, starting with the first comment, that yes, I agree, that kind of, I'm not sure that I would have described it as Eurocentric, but it certainly wasn't internationalist. It certainly wasn't the, it focused primarily on the racism that people were experiencing in their communities. And it was quite interesting to me how it pollinated in different countries. There were Black Lives Matter demonstrations in Reykjavik, in Helsinki, in Krakow, all over Europe, but it did primarily focus on the experiences of minorities in Western countries, and to be successful, it will have to have a more internationalist, linked up notion. But I think that given where it came from in terms of the death of the way that George Floyd was killed and the world in which he was killed, that didn't surprise me too much. But I agree with your basic point. I mean, I feel that, and the left really does sometimes kind of get overly and unnecessarily confused when it comes to the connection of race and class. And well, that's class, isn't it? Or that's race, isn't it? And that you can't understand either of them separately. And to attempt to understand either of them separately is to misunderstand both of them completely. That working class black people, they're not black people sometimes and working class people other times. They're black working class people all the time. And, and that the British working class actually has the capacity to understand that. If you look at a range of ways in which, back to the kind of 19th century and the cotton workers in Manchester over Confederate cotton, it's the organised British working class can understand that. But the case has to be made. And all too often, the case isn't made, largely, I think, because of, and this comes on to your point, Julie, of kind of flawed electoral concerns. And I think that the success of the movement in the fight against abortion is to somewhat contingent on rescuing it from the Democratic Party. to be honest, that the degree to which it decides to wait for another election, to wait for the selection of of better judges, to kind of organize and understand its struggle in the timetable of kind of when people get elected, actually just misses the point. And it misses the point in a way that the right wing doesn't miss the point. The right wing has been going after this for a long time, in sun and hail, when it cost them votes and when it didn't. They have been going at this for a long time. This did not just happen. And so, and time and time again, certainly the American left, I think the British left occasionally leaves it to, the people in charge. And they say, don't rock the boat. Don't rock the boat. But like, we aren't in your boat. And frankly, your boat's crap. It's not that good. So, not to stretch it too far, we have to build our own boat, and we have to decide the destination that we want, and then we drag them there, kind of kicking and screaming if need be. And that's my fear for it. That all of the energy that I spoke about earlier, people coming out to the streets, the biggest demonstrations, all that kind of stuff, then became kind of funneled into this party which is for big money and big interests and narrow electoral strategies, and that was kind of the end of it, really. And we can't have that. We can't have that again. That will kill it. Waiting for the statement, waiting for Joe Biden to do something. Joe Biden will do what we make him do. So we have to get onto the streets and we have to make him do the things that we want him to do.
So we've just got time for a few more.
Hi, I just wanted to talk about the sort of arguments around identity, but also around racism, culture and colonialism. And I watched, it's a lot in a couple of minutes, I know, but I watched a brilliant documentary a couple of nights ago, and we talk a lot about how important history is and how the people that rule society always want us to make us forget our history and our victories. And it was about this cricket series in 1976 with the Caribbean against England. Now, first of all, if people know anything about sort of the Caribbean and about sport, previous to sort of in the sort of years before this, the Caribbean, as the ruling class always want them to be, were really divided. And you talked at the beginning about sort of they even argued about roti. But I mean, you saw with the cricket, with the Caribbean cricket team, how they did all come together, and they at first they were really kind of vilified, and they were trashed in Australia, and the British press used to call them calypso cricketers and used to really kind of patronise them and demean them. But one thing that really united them, and it really makes you understand about people do understand history, and that people do understand the oppression that the West have kind of imposed on them for centuries. Tony Greig, who was the captain of England at the time, was South African, and he made jokes about them, and he made comments about making them grovel and making them crawl. And at that point, they weren't that unified, and they weren't that organised, and weren't that confident. But that really gave them the fire to really train and really trawl the Caribbean to get the best of the best fast bowlers, batsmen, etc., etc. And then they came to Britain, and Britain thought they were going to trounce them, and actually they trounced and they beat them five matches to 0, which was unheard of. And people throughout the Caribbean who lived in this country and were working in this country and suffering racism in this country all stood together, and they just partied and danced, and people in the Caribbean partied and danced, and they actually, because Tony Greig was South African, people in South Africa partied and danced and supported the Caribbean team. So it united people both in the continent of Africa, people that were suffering and struggling against racism in Britain, people in the Caribbean, and also anti-racist. My partner's white, and he remembers that really made him confident and proud that black people were standing up to these white racists and these colonialists, and actually it really united people. And a lot of the people that got confidence from from seeing Britain, the sort of the master race trounced at the game that they taught us, actually went on and fought in Lewisham. So all these things really do link up, and we've got to keep making those links and standing up together and supporting each other.
I loved Gary's point about how Black Lives Matter has spread into different workplaces and offered people confidence to challenge the racism that maybe they wouldn't have had the confidence to. And just thinking about where I am in a university, we saw a massive impact of Black Lives Matter, where students often were leading kind of challenging us on why our curriculums were not talking about Black British history, for example, and so our curriculum has massively changed. But also in the union, we've had a strike in universities over the last year, and one of the key demands of our strike has been around the race pay gap, which has been really, really important and has been really pushed, and that again has been kind of led by the Black Lives Matter movement spreading into the workplace. And we're really lucky. I'm in Manchester, so when Gary came over to Manchester, it was absolutely amazing for his inaugural professorial speech. He did it for the union, which was just brilliant in terms of kind of really supporting the strikes and stuff going on. So thanks to Gary for that. And my question was more just for Gary, moving into academia, can you talk a bit about your experiences and the change of moving into academia and the links with Black Lives Matter and questions you've already discussed?
Hi, Gary. It's a pleasure to hear you talk. Thank you for being here tonight. I was just inspired to talk by the first contribution about Black Lives Matter being Eurocentric. And I was thinking about the campaigns I've been involved in over the last couple of years to deal with the other existential threat that the Supreme Court are pushing through legislation around climate change, and how climate change is actually cut through to race and class. I'll cite the example of the campaign against the Edmonton incinerator, which is a very poor working class area, disproportionately black and ethnic minorities, and that campaign has actually taken up those questions of race and class and connected them to the climate movement, to the threat of climate change. And I think that is the sort of angle, the sort of area where we can cut through those divisions between race over here, class over here. The threat is for all of us, and that threat can be seen already in parts of the global south, and the impact that will have, the migration that will cause, will have impacts here. So I think there is an argument, there is an area of campaigning where we can bring those two things together. Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you. Thank you for your talk and conversation. I appreciate that. Just responding to the lady to my left a little bit, I wonder if it comes down to international coalition to promote women's rights generally. I think about that. I think that's a powerful idea. On the subject of identity, I'm English and Irish, a Republican. I'm a European. I'm a global citizen. So do you think that identity is about maybe experience and conviction? And do you think people can have various identities in a rational sense that sometimes compete, and it's a process of negotiation?
Right.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we spoke a lot about the Black Lives Matter movement, of course. And I was just wondering, like the previous one, not the one that's gone, one of the most divisive things was what it meant to be black. I remember some people saying, like, there's a debate that goes around saying, like, East Africans are not particularly black. If you're Somali, you're not black because you have Eurocentric features, even though, like, if the human race died in East Africa, like, the Europeans have our features, it's the other way around. But, like, I was wondering what you define as black and in terms of like the Black Lives Matter movement. So yeah, that's it.
All right, Gary, I really liked your two comments about, the first one about that anecdote about the kids and the fist and how they got it automatically. You know, it just came to them. I really like that. And I really like the notion of the boat. We've got to build our own boat. So I suppose my question to you is, what type of boat? What type of movement do we need? And I ask this because I have a bit of history. In 1977, because I was born in Sheffield, and when we first came down to London, I spoke like Geoffrey Boycott. I did. And when Lewisham happened, because Lewisham was right behind my school, my first and early introduction to fighting the Nazis was seeing an anti-Nazi leafleting outside the school. So I got it that way. There was an organisation there, and there's politics behind it. So I suppose my question to you is, what type of organisation, if any at all, do we need going forward? Revolutionary politics for black people, it's not alien, it's not accidental. C.L.R. James, and in recent times, the first contributor talking about Eurocentrism, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the Kenyan writer, he writes about the post-colonial experience when new rulers take over, new indigenous rulers take over. So, what is the vehicle to shift this movement forward? What would you say it is? That's my question.
Apologies in advance for if I've failed to answer any specific question. The question about what I would define as black, actually I just try not to define it. I find it's not helpful. Do you know what I mean? It's not helpful for me to go there really, and that kind of this is where the problem comes in. This is where, when identity is a place that you end up in, as opposed to a place to start with, then people are like, well, they start talking about your nose and your lips, and it's like, come in and fight. If you're fighting, then that's good with me. And there will be times when black people will want to self-organize. There is that. But ultimately, I'm for the liberation of humankind. So kind of like, it's a big tent. Come in. Or it's a big boat. I'll get to the boat later. So, I'm looking for an ark is what I'm looking for. I remember the 1977, and I didn't grow up in that. I grew up in Stevenage. Very few black people. Lots of racism. And I remember feeling emboldened in that moment. And I remember thinking, I was 8, and I remember thinking, I have a culture with the cricket, that I have a culture. And I remember the Tony Gregg, my mum's, the West Indies, when they're down, they grovel, he said, and we intend to make them grovel. And my mum repeating that endlessly, and then every time a wicket fell, I remember walking up to the shops and they're calling me back and going, Brian Alder's gone. So it was, because it was 77. Notting Hill, the demonstrations in 76, okay. Notting Hill was kicking off around that time. The racial debate, and this is something that is important to understand and recognize, the kind of things that they could get away with that they can no longer get away with now. We talk about what does victory look like. Well, that's why kind of something like Black Lives Matter, them taking the knee, when you know the kind of things that they used to do at football grounds, the chants they used to make, and that was a place where the NF organized and recruited, that now that the English football team would feel the pressure, primarily from its black players, to take a knee and make an anti-racist statement for every game. That's a big deal. And that didn't come about because they woke up and decided to be anti-racist. That came about because people came out onto the streets and demanded some kind of change, and that was reflected in the kind of people that play that sport. My experience of being an academic is somewhat thwarted by the fact that I joined a week before lockdown. So I'm still refraining from making any broad judgments. I would say this, though. I didn't realize that becoming a black sociologist would be like being a white rhino, that it would be so rare, that black people in the academy would be so few. That I wasn't prepared for. And when I saw the numbers, I was kind of really quite shocked, appalled, actually. And not that journalism, is any place to come from, but I guess I imagined it would be it would be different elsewhere. But I've had a limited amount of contact to kind of really want to sound off. The point that the gentleman makes about climate justice is a very good one, and it speaks ultimately, I think, to the point, which is that it doesn't matter what colour we are if we're all dead, right? And that these, and this comes really, this is going to come to your question, which I'm going to end on, and to these connections exist. These links exist, but they have to be made, and they have to be organised, and they're not always as obvious as we think they should be. And I think it's our job as whatever you want to call yourself, as socialists, as revolutionaries, as progressives, to make those connections, to be constantly making those connections. Which brings me to the last question. What kind of boat do we want? We want an arc. We want something that everybody can fit in. I want a multi-racial populist movement. Now, you could call that, I mean, it would have to be some kind of socialist movement, because we're not getting anywhere without liberation of the working class. And that in itself is going to demand a range of people, a range of different people. And the notion is that either we're all free or none of us is free, and freedom is the point. That I remember interviewing Angela Davis and her talking about, well, it's two things. First of all, she talked about diversity and the issues with diversity as being the difference that brings no difference, that it can be the difference that brings no difference and the change that brings no change. That you can look different and act the same. You can have photo opportunities and not equal opportunities. I don't want a world that looks different and acts the same. I don't think the people on the flight to Rwanda are thinking, well, at least it was Priti Patel. She's Asian. She's deported me. That's okay. It's not okay. So whoever's on that arc, they have to, it does not just look indifferent, but it has to be different. And that difference is about a sense of equality and freedom for everybody. That if some people aren't free, then none of us are free. And because the other thing that Angela Davis talked about was, she said, there was, after slavery, they broke the shackles. That's a version of freedom. But actually, I want more from my freedom than just not having chains. And that's, I think, what we are fighting for. And that's the challenge, actually, in a post-civil rights era where you have these particular goals in civil rights. Right, we're gonna integrate that lunch counter, and we're all gonna get to vote. And then you get all of the trappings of equality and none of the equality. Well, we want the whole cake. So we're gonna have to fight for the whole thing, and we're gonna have to make that case. And I think, sadly, because of the way that the world is going, we have to make it urgently. And I think that there is a receptive audience for that case. That's why I was so heartened when Black Lives Matter happened, because it was, I mean, I was heartened because they were fighting racism, but it was mostly white kids who were out on the streets. And the fact that this message could be understood in pretty much every European country, in every American state, in towns and villages across the world, showed that there was a constituency. We have proven our capacity time and time again to win the argument and to create political space. And now we have to build on it.